Ladies and gentlemen, another HSR analysis. This one is being recorded a bit later in the evening as I've had a bit of a sleepy day. But today we're back with Mr. Sampo. I don't know if it's a fan favorite, but he's like the meme character or something like that. I don't know what he is, but he's Wind and Nihility. Now, if we reference back to our little cheat sheet here, Nihility means debuffer. Now, this is a very interesting one because I personally thought that Sampo was going to be like some sort of a single target hunt DPS because he like uses daggers. But regardless, he's a wind debuffer. Nihility equals debuffer, and that's pretty cool. So moving on, his single target skill, the same thing, just hits a single enemy, quite straightforward. But his actual skill throws a dagger that deals wind damage equal to a certain percentage of Sampo's attack to a single enemy. Keyword single. But then the dagger will bounce randomly between enemies up to a maximum of 4 times, each one dealing a certain percentage of Sampo's attack as wind damage. So you actually hit 5 times with the skill. So you hit a single enemy with that initial amount, and then it ricochets up to a maximum of 4 times. So hit single hit, then ricochet 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 hits essentially. I believe, if that's my maths on it. That's my maths. 4 ricochets equals 4 bounces after the initial hit. So that's that. So a total of 5 hits, which is actually quite a lot of damage if you do it on just, let's say, 2 targets, right? Because obviously it ricochets between random enemies, and if there's only 2 enemies, because obviously you need multiple enemies, by the way. I should clarify that. You need multiple enemies. It's not going to bounce between one enemy. It's not going to go bam, 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 bam. It has to bounce between some enemies, right? So you're going to need 2 minimum. And so if you have 2, it's going to be a lot of damage split between the 2 enemies. So that's pretty good. But again, I'm focusing too much on the skill. If we go to the ultimate, deal wind damage equal to a certain percentage of Sampo's attack to all enemies with a base chance to increase the target's damage over time taken by 30 odd or whatever percentages for 2 turns. Percentages are irrelevant. So what does that mean? Summarized essentially is it increases the value of dots on the enemies. So if you have a dot, let's say a burn on the enemy that does 100% attack of something damage per turn, well, if you apply then this thing by Sampo, the dot damage taken increase, that'll increase that 100% to essentially, in theory, 132. That's just in theory though. Or it could be like some kind of vulnerability thing, but regardless, it increases the damage of dots. Burn, bleed, shock, wind shear, whatever the fuck it may be, whatever the damage over time ability is, it increases that damage. So kind of a niche build so far. Dot damage buffing is a very niche thing, much like dot damage builds. But anyway, talent. Sampo's attacks have a 65% chance to inflict wind shear for 3 turns. Enemies inflicted with wind shear will take wind dot damage equal to a certain percentage of Sampo's attack at the beginning of each turn. Wind shear can stack up to 5 times. This is fine. It's essentially Sampo becomes a dot damage buffer, but he also has his own dots that he can apply. Although it is a 65% chance from any attack. Bear in mind that it's any attack, so you'll have to build these up over the turns, right? Which is fine. A total of 5 stacks, which, by the way, his dot thing, by the way, it can be quite fucking crazy. Look at that. 5 stacks of 52%. That's quite a lot. That's quite a lot, by the way. But yeah, you can do a dot build with Sampo, but it's only a 65% chance to inflict it, so yeah, it's kind of up and down. Technique. You blind the enemies for 10 seconds upon entering combat. Enemies won't detect your presence for your team. When you're attacking an enemy blinded by flash bombs, there's a 100% chance to delay all enemy actions by 25%. Now, it's kind of okay. Yeah, you delay enemy action, so you kind of go first, almost guaranteed. It's going to be good. It's going to be fine. But there is something interesting that I noticed whilst watching gameplay, and I think Sampo might be one of the few characters, that has this, where you can actually trigger his technique and then switch to another character and use their technique and actually have both techniques trigger. Here's why. Is because Sampo throws a flash bomb towards an enemy and inflicts blind for 10 seconds. Now, in the open world, the enemy is inflicted with blind. So now you switch to another friendly unit or another teammate and use their technique, and you'll start the fight whilst the enemies are blinded, right? They will have the blind thing, which that means that they'll have this following effect. When attacking an enemy blinded by flash bombs, there is a so and so % chance that they'll enter combat with this. And so you trigger 2 techniques at once. So he's one of the few characters that has this. I'm not sure all characters has this, because some characters just initiate combat directly. But some other characters have this effect, so it's very good to note down that you may be able to use Sampo's technique and then switch to another character and have 2 advantages at once, which is really, really good. Moving on though, his first trace extends the duration of Wind Shear by 1 turn. This 3 turns here turns into 4 turns, standard. Trace 2, using Sampo's ultimate, additionally regenerates 10 energy, so you have a 10 energy refund on it. I'm not sure what the cost is, but you get a bit of a refund. Spice Up is the next one. Enemies with Wind Shear effect deal 15% less damage to Sampo. It's fine. Enemies affected by his dot deal less damage to Sampo. Sampo's never really going to be the target of a lot of your attacks if you're doing kind of like a tankish build, but it's nice to have a bit of defensive for that. And so far, the character's fine. In his own regards and in what he does, he sounds okay. This damage this damage from the dot is pretty good. And the damage increase for dots from his ultimate is pretty good as well. But the thing is, it's such a niche build, and it's such a niche mechanic to do dot damage increases that it's very rarely going to come into like likelihood that you'll use this character actively unless you're a massive Sampo diehard fan. So the character so far is like okay at best. But moving on to the Eidolons, can that make him any better? Well, his first Eidolon, his skill bounces 1 extra time. So instead of bouncing 4 times, you'll now bounce 5 times to a total of 6 hits, including this initial one here, which is quite nice, a bit of a damage increase. Eidolon 2, when an enemy with Wind Shear is defeated, there's a 100% base chance to inflict 1 stack of Wind Shear equal to talent on all enemies. So it's kind of like a plague effect, or kind of like a plague spread effect, if you will. You kill one enemy with a certain dot, and the dot will spread to all enemies at a certain percentage. It is a 100% base chance, not a static chance, so this will be affected by enemy effect resistance. And also you building resistance, or rather, sorry, effect rate up will be a good thing if you want to do this, but again, a very niche build, so I wouldn't recommend it. Eidolon 3 is skill up +2, as well as basic attack up level +1. Fine. Eidolon 4, when Sampo's skill hits an enemy with 5 or more stacks of Wind Shear, the current Wind Shear immediately deals 10% of its current damage. So it's fine. You can get some very high instant damage, but the thing is, the small caveat is that well, yeah, it has to have 5 stacks already, right? And obviously the max count is 5 stacks, so you have to have the maximum amount of stacks and then hit him again to then trigger this. So it's just going to be a bit of like a, per se, overflow damage, if you will. If you are just, have already, it's a long fight, turn 5 or whatever, and you already have maximum stacks on him, it's just going to be overflow damage, which is fine. Eidolon 5, ultimate +2, as well as basic attack +1, standard. And then it's Eidolon 6, Sampo's talent Wind Shear damage multiplier increases by 10%. Essentially, this goes up to 62. If you want to look at it simply, if it actually is like that, probably not. Maybe an overall 10% increase multiplicatively. But yeah, a 10% damage increase to his skill, which is the dot damage. So it's fine. It's a very big preface on dots and dot buffing. So far, I don't think he's that great. Honestly, I'll be honest with you. Dot builds are very niche. When we talked about Hook, even Hook, I was very hesitant to kind of like say a good character, but because they are an applicator to AoE damage, an AoE application of dots everywhere, and it's high dot builds everywhere, I can see it being quite good there. And if you combo them together, and if you combo Sampo with another dot character, sure, it could be very good. But dot builds is just a very niche thing when compared to something like a crit damage, crit rate build that can do massive instant hits. It's just a lot more niche and a lot more, generally speaking, a lot weaker, so it's a lot harder to recommend. But obviously, we're not done yet, right? We have a light cone to look at. So if we take a look at the light cone really quickly, Sampo's signature one, Eyes of the Prey, increases effect hit rate of its wearer by a certain percentage and increases dot damage by a certain percentage. So technically, you are buffing yourself in every way possible. You're buffing yourself in your chances to apply your dot, as well as your actual dot damage, which is always great. A Sampo signature one is probably going to be his best in slot one, but taking a look at the other ones, for every debuff the target enemy has, the damage dealt by the wearer increases by a certain percentage, stacking up to 3 times. This effect also applies to dot damage, which is good, by the way. This is very good. You could very easily run a good night and sleep well. It's not going to be your best one in my opinion because you still want that effect hit rate increase just naturally, so you don't have to get it on your actual relic pieces. But honestly, good night sleep well won't be a bad one, and we will meet again after the wearer uses a basic attack or skill. The wearer deals X amount of damage as additional damage to a random enemy that is attacked by abilities. Probably not, just don't, this one just sounds terrible on everyone, to be quite frank with you. It sounds atrocious, so probably just don't run this one, period. But that's just my opinion. Eyes of the Prey is going to be the best one for this one, but obviously 5 stars is something that you're going to want to think about, and Mr. Welt Yang's in the name of the world increases the wearer's damage to debuffed enemies by a certain percentage, and then when the wearer uses their skill, the effect hit rate of this attack increases by a certain percentage, and attack increases by a certain percentage. Well, that's quite cool, that's quite nice, but is that effect hit rate going to be something that we take into consideration? I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Here's the wording though. The effect hit rate for this attack increases, right? But it's when the user uses their skill, right? It's skill specific. And if we take a look at Sampo's skill, there's no dot application here. Sure, the dot application happens through his talent, and maybe there's going to be some overlap there where it actually works like that. But if we're taking it at a face value, his skill doesn't apply any dots. So you're going to be losing out on this effect hit rate, which is unfortunate. But the part that you are getting is the damage increase. So go figure, right? What you will do, though, is actually want to use this one in the grand scheme of things if you're really trying to build your Sampo, because it's going to give you the most damage for your buck. You are going to have to get effect hit rate through other means, but you are getting incredible damage increase to debuffed enemies, as well as incredible attack increase. It's surmised that this one also applies to dot damage because it is just damage to debuffed enemies, and dot damage is happening to debuffed enemies because they are debuffed with the dot. But so on. This one is probably going to be your best one in the higher percentages in general use, in general gameplay. Eyes of the Prey is probably going to be a pretty good one, and that's the one I'd recommend for now. As for relic sets, it's quite straightforward. You can pretty much easily just go for wind damage and essentially Eagle of the Twilight line. Wind damage plus ultimate advances your action forward a bit, so you go again essentially. The reason this one is because, well, here's the thing. If you use his ultimate, and then that pushes your turn forward a bit, that means that you can very easily use your skill again to apply more dots and more dots and more dots and more dots and more dots. So when you're looking for a dot build character, frequency of dot application is pretty much the name of the game. If you can get maximum stacks of dots and get every enemy dotted, win, right? It's essentially a win. So that's probably why you're going to go for this one. Wind damage, and your ultimate moves your action forward by 25%, more frequency. Other choices, it's up and down. You could probably try Musketeer of the Wild. Wheat, I probably wouldn't though. Other ones, probably not. But for planetary ornament-wise, you got a lot of choices. If you're lacking, if you're in a very much a deficit of effect hit rate, go for Pan-Galactic Commercial Enterprise. It's probably going to be the best value for you. If you lack effect hit rate. If you're looking for just damage though, just go for Space Sealing Station. It's a pure attack increase. That's if you just want flat damage. If you want to, kind of muddle around with some crit stuff, I'd probably recommend your Celestial Differentiator, because Inert Salsodo buffs follow-up damage, and Sampo does not have follow-up damage. I'd get Celestial Differentiator as its basic attack and skill damage increased by 20%, but it does have a high demand of 80% crit rate or higher to actually trigger that last part, so be wary of that part. That's why, for me, an easy recommendation is Space Sealing Station, but high-end players will probably run Celestial Differentiator, as essentially actually only need 72 base crit rate. You only need 72, because then you get this 8% here, puts you up to 80, and then you'll get this effect right here. So it's not too bad. That's the recommendation for that. Relic set is going to be Eagle of the Twilight line, and then the planetary ornament is going to be Celestial Differentiator or Space Sealing Station. And that's been Sampo. He's a bit of a fucking weirdo, to be honest with you. A bit of a weird guy. Bit of an odd job, if you will. But he's cool. A bit of a niche build. You can most likely end up running him and having him as a good character, but it's going to take some time. It's going to take some refinement of your relics and your substats and everything. It's going to take a lot of refinement, but do be sure that it is definitely doable. If you get a certain amount of characters with certain dot builds and certain things like that, it's doable. Just honestly on launch, very niche. So that's been that. Hope you guys enjoyed Sampo. A bit late on this one, so I do apologize. Tomorrow's one will be most likely in the regular time and regular schedule. So I hope you guys enjoyed. like, subscribe, and have a great day. Peace out. Bye.